Okay, good evening everyone and welcome to episode 9 of Beneath the Waves with myself, Matt Silver, and Dave Hughes. Good evening, Dave.
Hello, Matt. Hello, everyone.
How are you doing, Dave?
Yeah, I'm very good, thank you.
Good, good. So we're going to move forward into the IT space this evening after a fantastic episode last week with Danish and talking around network analysis. Dave, do you want to run us through what we're going to be chatting through this evening?
Yeah, let me start by, as usual, a quick reminder on what we did last week. So, as Matt said, we had Dr. Danish Mishra, who is a complete expert on organization network analysis. And we talked about, how important networks are in the complex and uncertain world that we live in today, in order to navigate the fast-moving information and so on, and how to analyze networks, how to understand where people go to for their energy, where people go to for their information, where people go to for collaboration and ideas and creativity, where people go to for guidance and development. And understanding that, and therefore, who are the pivotal people in networks? What role do you play in the network? How can you enhance your networks? Really fascinating subject, and I think we had a really nice half hour last week on all of that. So this week, as Matt said, we're going to talk about some stuff on the IT. And we're going to talk about, all of you, I'm sure, are facing really difficult decisions and really difficult work as you prepare schools to be reopened. I'm sure many of you are in schools that have reopened for the first time since lockdown today. Others are getting ready. Others are preparing for other changes that are happening. So, and this is all completely new, untrodden territory. So how do we firstly unlock the wisdom that is out there? So this builds on the network discussion we had last week. How do we make sure we're drawing in all of the expertise we can and all of the ideas we can, and how do we then turn those into clear decisions so we can move forward? Because we don't have time to spend too long prevaricating. We need to get on with stuff at the same time. So if we want to unlock the wisdom of the crowd, there are really 4 conditions that need to be present. The first is we need diversity. We need lots of different thoughts, views, ideas, values, beliefs, and all of those, because that melting pot really delivers a lot of ideas and a lot of creativity. We need to ensure the environment encourages independent thought. So, if we have a whole load of diverse people, but actually the leadership leads in a way that people don't feel they can say their point of view, then that isn't going to work. So the environment that creates independent thought, together with decentralization, so making sure all the people who are going to be impacted by decisions are involved somehow in the decision-making process. So there is a decentralized process for pulling things together. And lastly, that all of that is then integrated together so that it's integrated into a clear plan, way forward, and set of actions. So we use a model we call EDI, which is emerge, differentiate, and then integrate. And I'll explain what each of these steps are. I don't know what it's like for you guys, but I find that quite often, if I'm part of a team that is grappling with a difficult issue, quite often you'll find people are coming at this from very different perspectives, very different points of view. So for example, there might be somebody who really wants to discuss the ideas and look at trends and look at where things are going and look at some big picture stuff. While there's somebody else also in the team who's just saying, guys, we need to make a decision. We need to get on with this. We need to get moving. And therefore is not in the state of mind to be open to ideas and discussions. So how do you make sure you get the ideas out onto the table, but also follow a process that means that you come out the other end with a clear plan and you're ready to act upon it?
And I think that we're touching back to the values session that we ran earlier there in the episodes, Dave, of where are you on your values development is often what you're trying to get out of the situation. So are you trying to seek power from that situation? Are you trying to stick to the status quo and the system? Are you trying to make sure everyone's happy? Or are you then taking that conscious step into innovation and system balance? So I think it's worth just touching back on the spiral dynamics.
Yeah, no, really good point. I mean, if you've got somebody who operates from a yellow value system, they'll be wanting to innovate and bring lots of ideas and be disruptive. And there's somebody else in the team who's operating from a very red value system of, we've got to move, we've got to make a decision, we're going to make stuff happen. Then there's going to be a clash from the start. So that's why we very deliberately start with a step which we call emerge. And emerge is all about getting all of the ideas, all of the thoughts out into the room or into the virtual room. So this is a very, that's why we call it emerge. It's a very divergent phase. It's a very open phase. And it's important to have that everyone feels they're not being judged, they're not being evaluated. No idea is stupid, no input is silly. And we normally do it first individually to get the sort of creativity of a bit of individual reflection, and then collectively with the whole team.
And isn't there such a great opportunity in that sense, Dave, at the moment with shared docs, for example, that digital energy that's come from the situation that we're in, for everyone to have that voice, to literally have the isolation while still being in the meeting, to think creatively individually before bringing it together collectively.
Lots of clever ways of using technology to do this in a very efficient way. That means that then when you get together for the next step, you've all seen everyone's ideas and so on. So the next step, once you've emerged all of that input, is to then what we call differentiate. And this is what I call putting all of the ideas into different buckets. So I imagine that, if you're reopening a school, there are lots of ideas under the bucket of how do we keep social distancing with everyone back in school. There might be another bucket about how do we look after the well-being of kids who might be suffering a lot of anxiety and parents who perhaps have suffering a lot of anxiety. There might be another bucket around staff and how do we make sure we've got the right staff available to. So how do we put all of these ideas and break them up into all of the different buckets that exist.
And I think, again, there's a tie in there to the ZIP model for perspective taking. So essentially, whether you're a first person perspective and speaking from a personal approach, or a third person perspective speaking from a stats and data perspective, these buckets are actually, if you can find agreed common purpose. So we want to achieve social distancing, for example. Well, yes, both the first person and the third person, we want to do that. It sits in that second person realm of the ZIP model.
Yeah. So typically, again, there are different ways of doing this. You can do this in a room together. You can do it virtually. You can do it, but I'm sure you've all been through a process. But what I like about this is everyone is in the same phase at the same time. So when you're in Emerge, everyone's being creative and getting the ideas out. You haven't got the person we described earlier who's saying, come on, we can't afford to do this. We've got to get on with it and make a decision. Everyone's in the Emerge phase. Then you all move together into the differentiate phase where you're all working to put these into buckets. And then the third phase is how do you then integrate all of these different ideas and different buckets? How do they all fit together? How are they connected? And how do you then turn it into a narrative, a story, a plan, and then into a set of actions so you can implement? So what this enables you to do very quickly is make sure you've done all of those things. You've got all the ideas out on the table, because I'm sure something like we're struggling with at the moment, no one's got all of the ideas themselves. So you're tapping into that wisdom of the crowd, but then very quickly taking all of those ideas and organizing them, managing them into a set of categories or a set of buckets, and then integrating it into a story and a plan and a set of actions. So a very powerful way of quickly getting, managing through some very difficult times.
Dave, can I dive a little bit deeper just on that word you used, story? So when you say about creating that story, could you just give us a little bit more depth of how you'd feed that story back? Because I think there's something around storytelling, obviously the history of it, that very much pulls the crowd in to the story that you're going on to as well. So is there something you could just possibly further around on that story word that you use there?
Yeah, I think stories are a brilliant way of pulling this all together in a way where everyone can see where their bit of it fits into the whole picture. So I don't know, if you're a safeguarding lead in a school and you've thrown in lots of ideas about how to manage safeguarding during COVID and when people are coming back into school, um, and so the story that emerges at the end of the day is a story that connects together all of the things that have to be done. How we manage social distancing, how we manage communication to parents, how we know how many kids are going to be in on any day and how many are staying at home, how many, therefore, what staff do we need in, how are all the staff available. So all the bits, it ties into a clear story that knits the whole thing together into something that everyone sees how the whole thing hangs together, and their part in it and the role they have to play to then make it happen. And as well, linking back to the network discussion we had last week, who they have to stay connected with as we move forward to make sure the whole thing works together as a whole.
Hmm.
I
Yeah,
don't know.
I saw Denisha's network talk the whole way through there. I was really thinking, how far is each person from each person, and going back to the model that we use of three vertical and three horizontal, and how do we make sure that the voice of the student or the voice of the parents are only one step away from access. So how do we make sure that everyone is as closely connected and empowered in that network as possible?
Yeah. And does this, resonate with you, Matt, in terms of some of the decisions you've been having to make over the last few months and how you've worked together with your staff to get all the ideas and then crystallize them into a plan and so on?
Yeah, so I think it really does. I mean, the model's fantastic. I think it's important to acknowledge that at times there's been the need for different versions of that leadership. So just to say that this is not always the way that we would conduct it. And at times, again, linking back to our values development, we would be thinking in a very red mindset at times of saying, look, we need to get something done here and the decision has to be made. And therefore, far fewer people are involved in that. But in the whole, in that network model that we have, what we've been looking to do now that we have a little bit more breathing space and a little bit more time to make very considered and safe decisions, what we've begun to do is make sure that we're leveraging the expertise of the network. So just in our senior leadership meeting this morning, Simon, one of my members of staff, was saying, we're not risk assessment experts. There are other people in the school that are, for different reasons. How can we bring those experts into this conversation? And that's very much the way that we're now implementing our next step for this half term. So tomorrow we have set out questions for an open feedback forum for questions, first of all. So saying to our learning support assistants, our teachers, our leadership, our parents, our students, okay, what are the questions that you have? What are the areas that you think we're not addressing in school or need to do more of? So already some questions have come back with things around, okay, how do we ensure team dynamics continue to support each other in that time?
That's a great example of emerging the step by step,
yeah.
getting all of the inputs from across all the different stakeholders.
And again, that being the student and then the LSA that's in contact with that student, and then the senior leadership. So that's three. The student's voice is only one person away from being passed on. So their feedback from families really enriches the LSA's feedback to us, whereas the teachers who are overseeing the teaching are enriching the experience of both delivering and receiving the feedback from their students around teaching. So again, it's one person back to us. And therefore the voices and the leverage that are coming out of the system mean that everyone has an opportunity to speak. Now, everyone might not take that opportunity, and we purposefully put anonymous ears in place, our union reps, to make sure that there's anonymous voices as well, because when we have a whole school Google Hangout meeting tomorrow, there's going to be 70 people, and not everyone's comfortable with speaking in front of 70 people. Now, there might be people that won't say anything until then, and they'll bring it up tomorrow, which is fine as well. But it's accommodating for everyone, again, through the different stages of confidence and values that they have as well. So it's addressing that. So tomorrow, we've then established those buckets, as you say, around health and safety, site risk assessment, teaching, student well-being, and well-being overall for staff as well. So when we've collected that information, we're then putting those the information and questions or even answers into those buckets, and essentially building what will be a whole school response to our next steps.
And how will you then take that and turn it into a plan of action?
So I think a big part of that is definitely recognition for the staff, whether they have raised a question, answered a question, or simply listened. I think that ensuring that everyone knows that they are part of that journey and part of the story that we're currently in, and it's a very interesting story. But obviously, people have very different perspectives as to their, I can't think of another word other than readiness for that, and ability to capacity to manage the challenges that they're in. So we have to be really sensitive that some people will simply just want black and white information and be told that, whereas other people will want to buy into the story as more of a hero, perhaps if they're on that red level on values, whereas others might want the whole school just to be safe and happy if they're on that green level, or following the health and safety protocols if they're on blue. And some people want to be innovating into the future and take Shaftesbury into a whole digital realm. So my role is very much to ensure that system balance and ensure that everyone's had a voice and a part in that story, and then retell the story, not necessarily through myself, because otherwise I'm relying on myself as the central power of that network. So going back to last week's conversation again, I think it's really important that the information is then fed out through the strong and listened to voices in the community, just as much as their same voices are being the ones that listen.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's a very good example of the process that I just described in practice. The Emerge is very clear, getting all of those any questions anyone has, any inputs. So a really strong Emerge process. Then you put them into those different buckets, which were already defined, or you've defined based on the questions that were coming in.
We know what we need to address as a whole, but I think there's always capacity for more buckets to emerge, and that innovator role and culture, to be honest, within the school that we've fostered, with the social nutrients and the environmental structures that we have, mean that we will pose some challenges tomorrow, and you know, our culture is very much come with a solution, not a problem. So we will throw those problems back out tomorrow, and our innovators within the school will jump on those and really appreciate the opportunity to flourish and excel and solve them.
Yeah, good. No, I think you made a really good point about being open to new buckets. So you had some sort of clear buckets already, but that you're open to, oh, there's a new stream of ideas. Actually, that's a bucket that we hadn't defined and we hadn't got covered. So we need something new here. And then you tie it all into a narrative so people understand their part in it, and that sees how their question's been answered.
Yeah, but particularly for those people who are off site at the moment, you know, we've said to people, stay home, stay safe, and it's not just about the front line and what they're doing, albeit hats off to them for being willing to do it. But it's also, there's a whole infrastructure of hard-working staff behind a lot of the content that's going out and a lot of the the pastoral support that's going out. So I think it's important that they're involved in the narrative just as much as those who are in school each day.
Yeah. No, I think it's really not. By the way, everyone, please do feel free, if you've got any questions, post them on the Q&A or post them in the chat. In the meantime, Matt and I'll keep chatting away, but if you've got any specific questions, please do put them up for us. I think what's really nice is because many people would really shy away from saying, I want to get questions from so many people, because there'd be a reluctance to open that possible can of worms of what am I going to get thrown at. But actually, unless you do, you don't get all the questions, you don't get all the ideas, you don't get all the diverse points of view. So what the process you're going through really means you're going to really understand all the perspectives that are out there, and then ensures that as you go through the process and of differentiating and integrating, that you're addressing all of those different points of view, all of those questions, all of those perspectives. And there's also a view, a lot of people say, oh, we haven't got time for that. We've got to move far too quickly. So we will have to make the decision in the senior leadership team and just impose it on everyone. But actually this process, if you manage it well, doesn't take long. I mean, you said you sent out asking for questions, you collect the questions, you run a Google Hang for, I don't know how long you're going to run it for an hour or two, then you process the output. It doesn't have to be a long drawn out process. But the beauty of that process is at the end of it, I suspect everyone who's been involved will feel I've really participated and I'm part of this journey, as opposed to feeling they're having a decision imposed upon them.
Most definitely. So, one of our values is empowerment, and also we have well-being and positivity. So with well-being coming first, it sort of sets the vision at the moment. So how are we ensuring that our staff stay safe, our students stay safe, and that's almost our sort of short-term vision in that sense of really making sure that that's the central focus. And then when you have that North Star, the autonomy that you can provide for staff that generates that intrinsic motivation, when you foster that into the culture and you really make sure that that is lived, and these opportunities therefore have to happen if you're going to actually enact and live that autonomous approach to professionals in your school, then you can really get some huge network leverage from going back to Denish's point again. That network leverage, there are people with all sorts of skills across our school, and therefore they come out only if they feel psychologically safe enough to come out and do that. And as I said before, the way that people can express themselves doesn't necessarily mean they have to stand up, or what's the stand-up version in a Google Hangout, pin themselves on the meeting and have their voice. You put your hand up, yeah. But how do you actually really get that energy going across the school? And to the point of one of the questions around team development, actually, how do we get that energy buzzing across the whole team and the whole school? And how does everyone leave that meeting know that they're both appreciated, but also they're empowered to go out and solve some of the problems that we're facing as a school in general?
Yeah, it's great.
We, I can't argue for autonomy enough. I really, I think it's one of those things that within the education system, both in learning for young people, but also for adults, that the more you can provide that autonomy, the far greater the outputs that come. It's they're almost secondary.
Yeah.
I think that will be an interesting point next week in that we have Dr. Alan Watkins back on and his wife Sarah. And Dave, do you want to share a little bit around what next week's show is about?
Yeah, so Alan and Sarah are the co-founders of Complete, set up 25, 30 years ago. And I think I've said before, but maybe some of you haven't heard it, but they're both absolutely passionate about education. And when they started the business, they ran a piece of pro bono work for, I think, 6 or 7 schools in Southampton, really bringing the Complete philosophy into those schools, on the I, we, and the it, a lot of stuff on emotional regulation and management. and a lot of other stuff, and really worked very, very well. And they ran that for 3 years. Unfortunately, they couldn't. The way things worked out, they weren't able to keep that going in the way they were running it. But they're really passionate about education, so we thought it would be great to have them back and have a session on what does all this mean for the future of education. Next week is probably going to be our last one in this series. We might come back for another series depending on, if you guys would like it, please let us know. But we're thinking for now, next week will be the last one in the current series. And what a great way to end, talking about what does this mean for the future. And we'd love to hear your thoughts as usual as well.
And I think it's been a really tough time, but at the same time, it's a serious wake-up call to education, and that opportunity to really take stock of what it is that we provide as a service to our young people, but also to society. I think it's really important that we make the most of this wake-up call and really start thinking, okay, this was the model. What is that next model, and what does that look like, and how can that best serve our young people and the society that they'll enter into. So I'm really looking forward to next week, Dave. I've really enjoyed tonight, and in fact, I'm really enjoying the whole series. So yeah, I think there's definitely future episodes to come. But I just want to say thank you on behalf of myself and Dave for coming along this evening. We hope you've enjoyed it. As always, we'll have a Q&A session for those that are live attending with us now. So do stay on the line, and we look forward to seeing you next week on Beneath the Waves.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.